Jeepers, Mike, before I cue up our epic discussion about Jimmy Olsen, what did you think of the moment in the trailer for James Gunn's Superman where we see Clark and Jimmy dancing?
Yeah, I thought that was great. I thought that was a really good sign of what I hope are things to come.
Yeah, a great moment, right? I was very encouraged by that. I feel like it points to a true bromance between these guys. Like, I really want to see them as true buds, and I feel like that was very promising. Now, a couple of key questions prompted by that also kind of speaks to Jimmy Olsen in a more general sense. How do you think this Jimmy is going to address Clark? What is he going to call Clark in this movie? And do you have any hopes on that front?
Oh, that's a great question, actually. Well, I guess the stereotype is he always calls him Mr. Kent, right? So I would kind of just be happy if he just called him Clark, just on equal footing. David, however you pronounce his last name, seems like he's going to be playing a younger version of the character. So, I'm Jimmy, you Clark.
Okay, fair. What I was looking for, you failed, but that's okay. So what I was looking for, my hope, and based on that little dance between them, I feel like there's a chance of this. CK. I want CK.
Oh, yeah.
Right? This started with Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, where Jimmy called Clark CK. And then they continue this on Smallville. Mm-hmm. Aaron Ashmore's Henry James Olsen called him CK. And then in the one episode of Superman and Lois to feature Jimmy, we also got a return to CK.
CK.
Which I like for two reasons. One, I think it's cool that there's something that's very specific to the two of them. Like, Jimmy is the only person who calls him that. And then also, on a very personal level, one of my good buddies in law school, he always called me AD. And I just like that. I just like being called by my initials. And funny enough, like, that was the only instance where anyone has ever done that. So that's like with that one buddy, I mean, like, that's a specific thing to that friendship. So
I've never had that, but AD, I like that.
So, okay, so we'll see where we land on that. But yeah, I'm a big fan of CK. I definitely feel like we are well past the Mr. Kent era. Clark is totally fine, but I really would love to hear CK. And then I think maybe the biggest question of all, will this Jimmy have the Signal Watch?
Oh, that's a very good question. I say yes. I say, we're getting Metamorpho, we're getting Guy Gardner, we're getting Ultraman. I say he's got it. I don't know if he's got it at the beginning of the movie, but I say he's definitely got it at some point.
Yeah, I kind of share that. So here's the funny thing. In just a few moments, people are going to hear our 2-hour-long discussion of Jimmy Olsen generally, and we spent a lot of time on the Who Killed Jimmy Olsen maxi-series. Yet in that entire conversation, I don't know that we really hit on the Signal Watch specifically. So this is a good opportunity to kind of touch on that here. Yeah, I feel like there's a good chance. I would be more than happy to see it. I mean, the thing with the Signal Watch is, overall, when we look at Jimmy across time and media, I would say I'm a fan of the Signal Watch. I like it as a representation, a tangible representation of the amount of trust that Superman places in Jimmy, right? That he would give him this device that he doesn't give to anyone else, that Jimmy can use in times of emergency. Now, one of the things that we've seen shift over time is the origin of the watch, who actually makes it. So it debuted in Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, #1 back in the 50s. And in the classic pre-crisis continuity, the idea was Superman made it for Jimmy. And then when we flipped to the post-crisis continuity, specifically the World of Metropolis miniseries by John Byrne, we had the flip, and now Jimmy makes it, but Superman still allows him to keep it. Do you have any feelings on that front about where it should come from?
No, I have to be honest. As much as I love Jimmy Olsen, half the time I forget he has a Signal Watch. I got to be completely honest with you. It wasn't even in the Matt Fraction series. Like, they made a point of literally burying it under dirt. So I got to be honest with you. I often forget. I guess I'm so used to a version of Superman who's always talking about how he can hear everything. So I'm always just assuming that, like, it's like you have certain smells or something, or like, I know I can hear my kid crying amongst other kids. It's like, oh, Jimmy's in trouble. I'm going to go to him because it's probably something super related. So I got to be honest with you. Half the time I forget he has the watch, right? Did he have it in Estes and the DCAU?
So that's interesting. When we look at other media adaptations of the character, it's largely absent with few exceptions. Okay. So In the modern era, it was in one episode of Lois and Clark,
Okay.
The Green Glow of Home, where Jimmy makes one. And I reached out, shout out to Matt Truex, host of Lois and Clark, to the new podcast of Superman. Cause I was like, I just want to double check. Was it one and done or did it ever come back? He's like, nope. Classic Lois and Clark was used once and never again. And then, yeah, in Superman, the animated series, where we have a young Jimmy with hockey hair, as you like to call it.
I stole it from Kevin Smith.
There's a late in the series episode where Jimmy helps Superman out against Metallo. And at the end, Superman gifts him the signal watch.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Offhand, I can't remember if it ever pops up again after it. That was very much deep into the series. So I don't know that there even would have been much of an opportunity, but definitely wasn't something that got a lot of play.
Yeah.
So,
well, maybe it would have, right? Because I know it was supposed to go at least another season before plans changed.
Yeah. Now, had Smallville not killed off Henry James Olsen after he learned the secret at the end of season 8, maybe in season 9 he would have gotten the signal watch.
Oh, that's true.
I don't feel so strongly about the watch, but like I said, I do kind of like it as that representation of the trust. I don't feel super strongly about where it should come from. If Jimmy comes up with it on his own, I mean, definitely shows some ingenuity. And then Superman still has to allow him to keep it. So there's still that trust aspect. But I don't know, maybe in my heart of hearts, I kind of gravitate a little bit more towards like Superman just gives it to him.
Yeah, because I kind of like the idea that Superman could give it to anyone he wanted to expand on your point, and he just gives it to Jimmy. Like there's nothing stopping him from saying Perry's wife, Ma, Pa, Lois, everyone else is like, nah, it's just my kid's sidekick. No one else is going to have, a direct line to the throne here.
Although now counterpoint, if Jimmy comes up with it on his own, then maybe it's a little easier to understand why everyone else in his life doesn't have it, right? If it's like Jimmy makes it, and he's like, all right, you can keep it. But if Superman's making it, then it does kind of beg the question, why isn't he giving it? Why wouldn't Perry White have one of these?
Yeah. It's funny because the first place my mind goes is like, Jimmy's going to bring it to him and say, hey, I have this thing and it's amazing. But you're going to see in a flashback a series of shenanigans of how he gets the thing. And ultimately it's going to be a plot by Lex. Like that would be, to me, that's who's the smartest person in the world who could very easily build this thing? And then how do you get it close to the throne, to Superman? It's like, well, you give it to the kid who, for some reason, he lets hang around with him. So,
yeah, I like that. I mean, like I said, it's largely absent when we look at a lot of these adaptations. It's certainly not in the Christopher Reeve movie series. One place where it's kind of conspicuously absent to me is the George Reeves series, because the Signal Watch debuted in the comics in the mid-50s, smack in the middle of the Adventures of Superman television run. And there was a very close relationship between the show and the comics, and there were a lot of stories that were developed for both forms of media. So it wouldn't have shocked me if we had seen the Signal Watch on the show, but I guess kind of the argument against that is, as silly as the show could get at times, it was still pretty grounded. So that would have been I feel like a Signal Watch might have been a little out there.
Yeah.
Plus, Jack Larson's Jimmy on that show, he was plenty busy. He was being mistaken for a prince and made boy editor for a day and became a millionaire for a period of time. So he had his own shenanigans. And it was easy enough in that show for them to summon Superman anyway, because they would just let Clark know that they needed him to contact Superman.
Exactly.
And then that was it. But yeah, that's an instance, just given the time period and given the prominence of the Jack Larson, Jimmy Olsen character in the show and just in that era, that's a place where I might have expected to see it at some point.
Yeah, it always makes me think of doesn't Dick Tracy have a radio watch or something, back in the day? Doesn't he?
I don't know offhand.
Oh, okay. Know. Yeah, I just know that's, so much of this stuff we pull from the comic strips as well. So often I think of Jimmy Olsen beeping his watch, and I think like, oh, was that someone reading Chester Gold and said, oh man, I want to borrow that. That's a cool way to get Jimmy to Superman in one panel. So
now all of that to say, I think what has already emerged as my favorite way to deal with the Signal Watch comes from the Nick Spencer story, Jimmy Olsen's Big Week, the series of backups that was collected in a one shot, because there we lead off with Jimmy in a tight spot and this notion that, oh yeah, the Signal Watch never works. It never works when I need it to, but it's there for show. And my pal has super hearing. And so throughout the scene, he's tapping Morse code.
Yeah.
And I read that and I was like, oh, perfect. Like,
Yeah.
that's exactly what this should be. I feel like that's the sweet spot for this. Like, he has it, but it doesn't really work, but it doesn't matter anyway. I kind of like that.
Yeah, I love that one shot. I really do. I think it's a great comic. I agree. I think that's probably the best use of it.
Yeah, right on. So people are going to hear our conversation about Jimmy. And like I said, we talk a lot about the Matt Fraction, Steve Lieber maxi series. Now, people will hear this just a few weeks before the release of the deluxe edition hardcover of the maxi series, which of course we have not seen or held yet. But I do know from the original solicitation copy, there was a little blurb about the new hardcover adhering to the author's preferred reading order. I don't know what that will mean. We talk in our episode about the nonlinear narrative in the maxi series. I don't imagine it will be radically different than the soft cover that I read or the single issues that you have or what's on the app. But I guess I'll just issue that disclaimer in case anyone goes out and gets the deluxe edition hardcover, which I would not discourage people from doing. It's a wonderful story and I encourage people to read it however they read it. But just in case anyone goes out and they get the hardcover and there's something that doesn't quite line up with the discussion that we had, perhaps it's a result of that. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there because I guess that's kind of an open question at this point as far as what Fraction's preferred reading order is and how that differs from the way the story is currently available.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this later on in this episode, but that was a pandemic book, so it's hard to say what in Act 3 wasn't planned for or what have you, or what better ideas came after that break that they had. I presume they had a break. There was a break in publishing, but he may have written it all up front. So it wouldn't surprise me if he moved things around. But at the same time, it's like he is such a good storyteller. And even the couple of changes that you pointed out between issues and collected edition were ones I agreed with. So again, I would say if you are listening to this and you've never read it before, buy the hardcover. If nothing else, the art's unbelievably good, and I'm sure Fraction in no way made it worse.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I own the soft cover. I'll be buying the deluxe edition hardcover. I enjoyed it that much, and I'm happy to have it in another format. So people will hear our episode. You are going to be back next week. Next week is huge. Next week, everybody, is Joe Kelly week. So we're going to kick things off on Tuesday, our regular release day, with my long-awaited interview with Joe Kelly about his 50-issue Action Comics run. We recorded it a few weeks ago, and I've been waiting for the right time to release it, and I'm excited for everyone to hear it. He said something when we were done. I wish I had captured this, but I had stopped recording. But he said that the things I asked him about were the things that mattered most to him when he was writing his stories, and that to me was the best compliment that I could get. And I really felt like we were really vibing during the discussion, and it was a great back and forth. So I'm excited for everyone to hear that. So that'll be next Tuesday. And then next Friday, we're going to drop a special bonus episode where you and I are going to talk about Kelly's JLA run, which you have been asking me about for years, and it's coming. So extra episode next week. We'll have the Joe Kelly interview on Tuesday, and then my conversation with Mike about the Joe Kelly JLA run on Friday. So a lot of fun stuff still to come. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen across time and media is my pal, Mike Sangregorio. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
How much of your affinity for Jimmy Olsen stems from the fact that he's from Yonkers, New York?
I would say it wasn't the original source, but once I discovered that, he became top shelf. He immediately moved to the very top of the list.
Where you are from as well, yes?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah. I lived in Yonkers a very long time. My wife was born and raised there. I still have family there. So knowing that Mr. Action is from there as well makes me very happy.
Not where I'm from, but growing up in Lower Westchester, obviously spent plenty of time there and always enjoyed that point of connection as well. Do you know offhand the first time that was directly referenced in the books?
I thought it was in What's the Jeff Johns
Secret Origin?
That's where I first saw it. That's where I thought it was introduced. Yeah,
that's where I first saw it as well. I just didn't know offhand if it had been established previously, and I tried to dig around, but I didn't find anything definitive. So I guess we'll put that out to our audience if anyone has any clarity on that. But certainly, at least by Superman Secret Origin, we have that great rooftop scene between Superman and Jim, and he talks about how he's thinking about packing up and going back home to Yonkers, New York. Love it.
Yeah, no, that was a great scene. I for years I would just have that page saved to show people, and yeah, I just assumed that it was introduced there because that was hey, this is going to be the new continuity. Let's see what sticks, and making him a transplant I thought was a good idea. So
yeah, absolutely. So one of the key pieces of our discussion will be the 2019 to 2020 12-issue maxi series, Who Killed Jimmy Olsen, by Matt Fraction and Steve Lieber. But I thought it would be helpful for us and for the audience to sort of widen this out and offer more of a survey of Jimmy Olsen and the various ways he's been depicted across time and media. So we'll do that, and then we'll segue into a more specific discussion about that maxi series. But I just have to say, and you know, because I was texting you as I was reading this thing, whoa, did I love this maxi series. This was the first time I read it. I dragged my feet. It's only been out a handful of years, but nevertheless, I'm really kicking myself for not reading it sooner. You've been singing its praises from the jump, right?
Yeah. I added it to my list the second it was announced. I bought every issue. It's actually, this is a weird book for me. So I love both of the creators. I would have gotten it regardless of the character. This book came out right as the pandemic started. So I was getting every issue when I was working in Manhattan every day. And suddenly it was like everything stopped. And I was like, oh no. Terrible things are happening, but I do hope I get the rest of these issues. And then I don't know how they made it work, but eventually when things started printing again, this was actually the first series I added to my Oh Yeah comics of Harrison, New York pull list. And that is my shop continuing through today. So for a litany of reasons, this series holds a special place in my heart.
I mean, there's so much to say, and we'll talk more, but it unfolds in a non-linear fashion. So it's not dissimilar from a Quentin Tarantino movie or an episode of How I Met Your Mother. And as a massive fan of both that filmmaker and that television series, I felt right at home. Also, in terms of its tone, its overall sensibilities, and the density of jokes and the callback to jokes, there was a certain show I had in my head as I was reading this. And I said, man, this reminds me so much of X. This had to have been an influence. And then I get to the final issue, and there's a scene where there's a character getting on a plane, and there's a stair car, and it has the name Wayne on it, but it also has the name Bluth, spelled with 2 O's, not a U. But of course, a direct reference to the Bluth family of Arrested Development. And I got to that. I'm like, well, no wonder I love this so much. And that was the show that I was the whole time. I'm like, God damn it. This reminds me so much of Arrested Development in all the best ways.
I never made that connection before, but I also love Arrested Development. So I'm with you 100%.
Yeah. It's one of those things pretty much instantly. I realized, I think it was even after the prologue, I texted you and I said, this is the Jimmy Olsen story I always wanted. And then a few more issues in, I texted you again and I said, this is one of my favorite comic series ever. And as I'm saying this, I do worry about being hyperbolic or building it up too much, overselling it to people. And I don't know how many folks who are listening to this have read the maxi series, because I put the call out to our Patreon community to say, hey, we're going to be covering this. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Crickets. And so I said to myself, oh, this might be one that flew under the radar a little bit, maybe because of the pandemic or because maybe there's not as much interest in Jimmy Olsen as we thought. I don't know. But just from the jump, so like I said, I don't want to oversell this too much, but I guess what I kept coming back to is that particularly for things we've covered for the show, there are plenty of stories I've enjoyed more than this, but I don't know that I've ever been over these past 5 years since we've been doing the show, this pleasantly surprised. Like I went into it figuring, okay, you know, Mike loves it. That counts for something. Like I'll probably enjoy it, but like it was truly pleasantly surprising, like just how much I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, not only do I really like it, I like recommending it to people because it uses the 12 issues really, really well. every plot point that's introduced is wrapped up, and all the nonlinear stuff eventually makes sense. You know, I've had to read it a few times to suss it out, but it plays fair with you. It's the same artist throughout. He's doing some of his best work. The designs of Superman and the other superheroes, when they do show up, perfect, spot on. There's not a lot of continuity. It's got a timeless feel. I'm really happy it's collected. I was worried it wouldn't be for a while. And this is one of those books where it's like, do you like Superman at all? Try and read this. I think you're going to love it.
So more to say on Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, who killed Jimmy Olsen. Well, let's talk about the character more generally. And I have a few core big picture questions, and I'm very curious to get your take on it. And I guess the first one, very basically, is just how important is the character of Jimmy Olsen to you? Is he a character that you're looking to see and expecting to see in various incarnations? How prominent should he be? Do you not feel that strongly? Where do you land on this?
I think he's really important. As far as I'm concerned, he's Superman's Robin. He's his boy wonder. He's his sidekick. He's his representative in the Teen Titans. A superhero needs someone to talk to. They need friends. They need allies. They need partners. Jimmy is his partner. Jimmy is fearless, and he always supports the man of tomorrow, no matter what he's doing. And I get that in some incarnations, they just want to have Lois fill that so that she has more to do in the story. But to me, Jimmy is a friend. They're friends. They hang out. They do things together. They rely on each other. They give each other crap. There's not a romantic interest there. And Jimmy's capable of carrying the story when he needs to, just like all the various Robins have throughout the years. So I think a good Superman story needs a good Jimmy Olsen role, but also, as this has shown, like Robin, Jimmy Olsen can carry his own story. He's got enough going for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess similarly, I do view him as quite important. That's not to say that every single story or other media adaptation has to include him or has to feature him prominently, but he's definitely a character who I think brings a lot of value or can bring a lot of value. And I guess that leads me to my other big question, which is what kind of depiction of Jimmy resonates with you the most? I mean, I think when we look at the character across time and media, there is a lot that is consistent, but then we see variations as well, especially in terms of how old he is or how competent he is or changes to his backstory, things like that. So I guess, is there anything either sort of more abstract or a specific depiction that you can really point to and be like, this is kind of the ideal for me of what I look for in a Jimmy Olsen?
Outside of the comic, when someone says Jimmy Olsen, I picture Aaron Ashmore. The Smallville version nailed it for me. His brother being the one who played Iceman in the X-Men films is an added bonus, but that's how I picture. He nailed it for me. All the scenes of him and Chloe in Smallville, it's like that's where my mind immediately goes. And part of that is just because of our age, the adaptations haven't been too kind to Jimmy. I'm not as big a fan of the Chris Reeves films as you are, but I don't think he had much to do there. Your dear Zack Snyder murdered him off screen. And even in the DCAU, he doesn't have anything to do. When he does show up, he's got hockey hair, and that's about it. So it's been rough going for a while. How
ironic, though, that your favorite version, Smallville, it wasn't even Jimmy at all.
It wasn't Jimmy. It wasn't. That was one of the times watching Smallville where I was legitimately surprised until they got to the funeral and the kid is standing there. And I was like, no, come on. I was shocked. I was like, wait, you killed Jimmy. That's crazy.
Yeah. I don't know that a spoiler alert is even needed. We've talked about this so many times over the years, but yes, Smallville introduced who we thought was Jimmy Olsen at the start of season 6. And he appeared on the show through that season 7 and season 8, and was played by Aaron Ashmore. And I think overall was a winning depiction. I liked him a lot. Don't know that the writing always served him well. You said that you liked the Jimmy Chloe dynamic. I guess I would have preferred he'd not been saddled with her, to be honest. And the fact that played into the love triangle and her unrequited pining for Clark, and more so Jimmy's insecurity over that. I would have preferred a slightly different lane for the character, but I did enjoy him a lot. And the heartbreaking aspect of it. See, we're getting this out of the way now. The first few minutes of the show, and I'm not going to keep harping on this, but for all the times we've talked about, like, I don't know that I've adequately captured the whiplash that I felt in that season 8 finale, because you get to a point where Jimmy sees an injured Clark's cut heal, and he realizes, as he had theorized earlier in the season, that Clark is in fact the red blue blur. And he's like, "You're cut. I was right." And Clark finally gives it up at this point after gaslighting this poor guy. And he's like, "You were right, Jimmy. You were the only one who figured it out. I'm sorry I lied to you." And then he asks Jimmy for help. And I just remember my elation in that moment. I'm like, season 9, these two, Jimmy knows the secret. He's going to help. Like, this is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
To go from that to Jimmy's murder in just a couple of scenes. And then the ultimate gut punch, finding out at the funeral that it wasn't Jimmy at all, but rather his older brother, Henry James Olsen. Yeah. And that's why whenever we talk about Smallville's version of the character, I do always refer to him as Henry James.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah. I have to remind myself, because I always just assume that he knows both the identity, but you're right. That's 9 times out of 10. That's a huge plot point, that he is Superman's friend, but he does not know that Superman is Clark. So yeah, I always have to remind myself of that. I guess I would just if I were editor-in-chief of DC, I'd be just like, he knows. He's the only one who knows. He's going to help him out. He's going to cover for him when he has to disappear out of the newsroom. So that's a good point.
One of the stories by Fraction and Lieber too, I believe, it's not collected in the soft cover, but it was in one of the specials that came out around the time of the Bendis Truth storyline. And so it's the short story with Superman and Jimmy after Superman has revealed his identity to the world. Do you know this one?
I don't remember.
Where he goes to talk to Jimmy, and Jimmy's like, "I knew." It's like, "Of course I knew." He said, "I realized there are only 2 people in the world who call me Jim." I still don't know how I feel about that. Part of me says, this is what you always want, right? Because my whole thing, it's not usually so much with Jimmy. I always think about this more in the case of Perry, where it's like, of course Perry would know. He's too good of a newspaper man to not know.
Yeah, no.
But I think we can, especially depending on what kind of Jimmy we're talking about, which is part of our conversation here, what version of the character works the best or resonates the most. And I think with a more competent, capable, savvy Jimmy, it tracks that he would know. So I think overall, I'm going to say that scene was a positive, but it was definitely one that had truly escaped my sight. I don't know that I'd ever come across it before. So it was interesting to kind of get that little moment there.
Yeah, it's a good way of positioning the character, because Superman's pal spends a lot of time with Superman. So most people don't spend a lot of time with Superman. They either spend time with Superman or Clark. And my headcanon is always like, Lois can't admit to herself that they would be the same person, kind of the same way Lex can. But Jimmy, it makes sense, where he'd be like, "No, you know what? I've hung out with you on the moon, and I hang out with you at work every day. It's like, I know this is it, but I'm going to wait for you to tell me, because it's not it's not my right to out you in any way. Like, you tell me or don't tell me. We're still friends. I still care about you." So
yeah. Just last thing about Smallville, it was so fascinating going through the Fraction series and meeting Jimmy's older brother, Julian. They didn't go with Henry, but Julian. So it's like, oh, an older brother, but I felt right at home. But I was, not to nitpick, but I say to myself, oh, if they had just named him Henry, then retroactively, I can look back at Smallville and be like, well, in the comics, he has an older brother.
Yeah.
The final piece, and then I'll stop complaining about how Smallville did the character so dirty. It's just, if they had planted seeds for this along the way, they could have done one of 2 things, and I think I would have been vastly more okay with it. One is, they could have just told us from the jump. I mean, I 100% don't think they were planning this.
No.
But if it had been the case from the inception that this is his older brother, then it's like, okay, fine. We can get on board with this, and then that gives them some more freedom with the character as well. They could have taken him in some different direction. So they could have done that. Or, I don't know, maybe by the midpoint of season 8, so only half a season before they pulled this nonsense, when Henry James and Chloe were getting married, there could have been a bit where we see them exchanging vows, and we hear the minister say Henry James. And then we're like, oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then at least when you get to that at the end, there's something there that set it up. I think that's the aspect of it. I was so disappointed to lose what I thought was going to be a really, really great dynamic in the next season. and then this reveal that just felt like it came out of nowhere. That's the thing that I've never been able to get past. But all that being said, as I was talking about in this maxi series, it was like, okay, an older brother. But down that road.
I mean, I was genuinely shocked in Smallville when they killed him. So I almost like that they didn't give you any hints that this wasn't him, whether or not it had been planned. Because I was watching it, I was genuinely shocked. I was like, that's not supposed to happen. And I was a little annoyed when the brother showed up later because I was like, well, all right, that's just a cop-out. But it didn't change the fact that I was like, oh, you know, Iceman's brother is playing Jimmy Olsen, no questions asked. That means he's safe. He's got plot armor. He's got to be with Clark later on in life. And then when they take him off the board, I remember just being like, I was not expecting that at all. Like, congratulations, CW.
All right. Well, I'm glad you weren't as enraged by it as I still am over a decade.
Oh, you want to get enraged when you talk about Batman versus Superman again? Because, my lord.
I know. Whenever people bring up the Snyder stuff, a lot of times I have to let it go and just keep us on course.
Is he in the theatrical cut?
Yeah, it's okay. Much more fleeting. The Ultimate Edition at least gives you a little bit more.
Because I watched the Ultimate Edition, and that's what made me angry, because I was like, this guy's great, and he was in Smallville too, right?
Yeah, the actor Michael Cassidy who played Julian.
Julian, there you go, full circle.
No relation to Olsen there. But I guess going back to these questions that I posed to you of how important is Jimmy, why is he important, and then like what do we look for in a Jimmy Olsen depiction? For me, I'll continue singing the praises of Fraction and Lieber, because there's a scene, a panel even, in, I believe it's the first issue or certainly early on, that to me, it stopped me dead in my tracks. And I said, wow, that just encapsulates 100% why we need a Jimmy Olsen, what this is all about. It's the scene where Superman and Jimmy are on the roof, and Superman's showing his quote unquote secret superpowers and helping Jimmy make this video, because he creates these video essays for the Daily Planet. And as we find out, they're the only things that actually make money for the paper, which I thought was great. But there's a moment where Jimmy says something to the effect of, you probably have better things to do than horse around with me. And Superman stops, and there's this panel where he's like, you know, horsing around with you some nights is the only fun I get to have.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, yep, that's it. And that's why they're pals, and that's why Jimmy is important.
Yeah.
And then hand in hand with that, kind of what I look for in the character. At this point in time, I am very over the very boyish, much younger Jimmy, who's like chasing after Lois and Clark, Miss Lane, Mr. Kent. I'm kind of over that version. I definitely gravitate more to a Jimmy who's older. He doesn't need to be exactly the same age as Lois and Clark. I think if Lois and Clark are slightly ahead of him, either in age and or accomplishment or career, that's okay. But I really do like versions where they're more or less on equal footing. And very recently, I've really been very impressed with My Adventures with Superman, the current animated series. Mm-hmm. And that animated show, I mean, really paints the three of them as this trio getting into trouble and whatnot. And I really like that. And hand in hand with them being on kind of on equal footing, it's very important that Jimmy and Clark and Jimmy and Superman, I think it is important for the friendship to be with both of the identities, but for them to actually be friends. And, you know, not too long ago, we talked about the Morrison New 52 action con. And I think the New 52 did right by Jimmy in that sense. I mean, I remember reading those stories even a while ago, and Jimmy's calling Clark dude. Yeah. And stuff like that. It's minor, but it goes a long way. It's like, yeah, no, that's how they would talk to each other. And they're playing video games.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, these are buddies.
Yeah.
So that, the being close in age and accomplishment, having a genuine natural friendship. And then the last piece for me, My Adventures with Superman, I think does this, certainly this Fraction series. Jimmy's got to have his own stuff going on. I really feel like this is critical. And I also recognize there's often not real estate for this. Like, I do get that in various stories, but I think he's got to have his own adventures, his own stuff. That, I think, is the other key ingredient for me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, listen, why did he become a character in his own right, you know, to begin with? It's because he had his own book, right? So he got to have adventures and do weird things and have his own love interests and everything else. And it turned out like, oh, hey, this guy can carry his own story. So I agree. I think he can't just be defined by his own relationship. He has to be interesting on his own, which is another reason I like this book, because Superman's only in like a dozen pages or something across 12 issues. And, I didn't even notice the first time I read it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know. This might be hard for either of us to answer, but I think it's very safe to say there was a point in time in the character's history where Jimmy Olsen was super popular. And certainly the George Reeves series and the Jack Larson depiction really raised the profile of the character and led to him getting his own book, like you said, which ran for decades and then eventually became Superman Family and incorporated the other characters. But still, so I think very safe to say there's a point in time Jimmy Olsen is wildly popular with the audience. I don't get the sense that persists to this day. And I guess maybe one of the things I was kicking around is you mentioned Robin. And I think Robin and Jimmy do occupy a similar space back in the day where the comics are written really geared for kids, for young audience. And so they see a fellow kid in the pages of Batman and the pages of Superman. And that's the character they can identify with. They see themselves as that character, and that's their way into these stories.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking, well, we know, right, as the years went by, the comics reading and buying audience got older. You didn't necessarily have, they're primarily kids reading. It's the people who read them as kids, but then got older and the stories aged with them and all of that. But maybe that's part of the reason why that way, or the function that Jimmy served, no longer mattered as much, because you weren't speaking to kids who were looking to him in that way. Do you think that's at play?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, listen, what's the joke in The Simpsons where Bart Simpson meets Adam West and he goes, who the hell is Robin? Right? Like when we were kids, the sidekicks were out completely. Like they were just gone. And then, Batman 89 comes out. There's no Robin. There's no sign of Robin. It's not until Batman Forever where Chris O'Donnell and they're like, oh, hey, we're doing Robin again. And the comics brought back Tim Drake and he had his own long running book. And then the Teen Titans cartoon series came out and Batman's not even in it. Jimmy didn't have any of that because, he's a bit player in the Chris Reeve movies. He's in like one scene of Batman Returns, but Superman Returns, but he never gets his there's a whole generation out there who just like Robin, he's in the Titans, or they just like Red Hood, or they just like Tim Drake. Like they have their favorite Robins. They love it. With Jimmy, it's just Jimmy. And, even when they did the Supergirl show and he was in it, he wasn't anyone's friend. He was just like another member of the team. He didn't get to carve out his own niche. He didn't get to have his own adventures. And, to this day, he still doesn't really have anything to hang his hat on.
I was going to get to the Arrowverse, but now's as good a point as any. So when we talk about depictions that really work, and we've singled out a couple, then by the same token, ones that don't. For me, I hate to say it because there's a lot that the Arrowverse did right, in fairness. But man, in my estimation, they whiffed it on Jimmy twice. 2 times. So first we have Makad Brooks playing James Olsen in the Supergirl series, and he's the art director at Catco.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, this has come up before, the notion of, hey, we want to move the story forward. We want to see the character down the line a bit. We want to see him more accomplished in his field. Totally fine with that. Casting a black man in the role, totally fine with that. My Adventures with Superman presents an African-American version of the character. Great. Oh, okay. So I have no issues on that front, just to be clear. But where I've always hit a huge wall with James Olsen is the physicality, the presence, the confidence, the suaveness. Like none of this screams Jimmy Olsen to me, right? There's kind of always, I think that even though I don't want him to be too young, there's still that boyish awkwardness that I think is just baked into who this character is. Mm-hmm. And at no point on that show did I ever really feel like they capture that. And it killed me further that they cast Jeremy Jordan as an original character, Wynn, who served the Jimmy Olsen function, essentially to the degree that I would have wanted him to. So it's like, why the hell was he just not Jimmy Olsen? And Macabre could have been Wynn. He could have been an original character. Yeah. I don't know.
He becomes original character anyway. He becomes the Guardian. It's like, he's great as the Guardian. Why didn't you just call him James Harper from the beginning? It's like, I was very confused.
Yes. So that drove me nuts. At some point, we're going to have more talk about the Supergirl series. I haven't cracked that one yet, but we're going to get there. It's a rare instance. I couldn't even watch the final season. I couldn't even get through it.
Oh, okay.
So did you watch it?
No, the only, I watched a handful of episodes that had Erica Durance and the Martian Manhunter in it. So okay. It was like, oh, hey, these are in my wheelhouse. I'm going to pop in. But no, I wasn't a long time Supergirl fan.
And then, years ago, you came on, we talked about the pilot episode of Superman and Lois. Did you keep up with the show? Did you watch it all the way through?
No, on and off, okay. But very difficult.
I've already complained about this, so I'll keep this short. But Jimmy Olsen, a different incarnation of Jimmy Olsen appears in but one episode of the final season of Superman and Lois, played by actor Douglas Smith, younger brother of director Gregory Smith, who helmed many episodes of Superman and Lois and was a producer and was Ephraim on Everwood. I don't know if that means anything to you.
What's Everwood?
Oh my God. First the BVS slander. Now this. That's 2 strikes now.
Yeah, there you go.
Still pals. But I talked about this when we did our Superman and Lois episode, but I don't want to be mean, but I swear to God, he played Jimmy as if he wanted to wear Clark's skin. There was just this unhinged, like crazy eye quality to him.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen the actor in anything else. I can't say, oh, that's just how he is or what. Something needed to change. That did not work for me. So the Arrowverse, that's an instance for as much as they did right, I don't think they did right by Jimmy Olsen.
Yeah. But Wynn really was Jimmy. I mean, it's funny because it's like nature abhors a vacuum, right? You can't do this story without a Jimmy Olsen type character. If you change him to something else, you're going to be writing your scripts and realize she needs someone to talk to. You introduce Wynn. And I actually like that for her because it turns out to be like Toyman's kid or whatever else. It's like, oh, that's really cool. I'm about that.
100%. Well, kind of on that note, we're talking about characters who weren't Jimmy, but were basically Jimmy. TJ White in season 1 of the Superboy television series is a photographer who works at the school paper with Clark and very much serves that role. I mean, I think if we were kind of looking at, we're talking about Jimmy Olsen, but if you kind of expand that to include some analogs to the character, I think that's one that fits that perfectly. Because I've been watching it, I'm like, oh my God, it's like Clark and Jimmy.
I mean, isn't that what Pete Ross is? Right? I mean, what is Pete Ross other than, hey, we need a Jimmy Olsen, but he hasn't met Jimmy Olsen yet. So here's his schoolmate, Pete Ross. I mean, really that's what it is. It's like at some point, he needs a friend, he needs an ally, he needs a partner. So.
Yeah. We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a new podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics. And if the title also makes you think of Superman, you're not alone, as the Man of Steel is Logan's favorite character and a regular topic of discussion on Single Bound. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at Single Bound Podcast. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow them on social media. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. We all love the big-budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of unbridled creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey film festivals. Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. Submission information for filmmakers can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and much more. Now, interestingly enough, right, as we're kind of bouncing around and especially focusing on a lot of these other media adaptations, it's appropriate because the character made his debut in the radio serial in 1940. Mm-hmm. Have you listened to much, if any, of the radio show?
No, I've never heard an episode of the radio show.
At this point, and in time, I can't go through all the thousands of episodes, but in time, I'll chip away at it more. Thus far, really, the main listening I've done has been to the Clan of the Fiery Cross. storyline, which was then adapted in comic book form as Superman versus the Clock.
Oh, yeah,
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
And Jimmy has a fairly prominent role. It's like the manager of the community baseball team or something like that. So I've definitely experienced the character in radio form, but yeah, made his debut there. This, in terms of some of this like background trivia, I think a lot of this is stuff that people have probably come across, so I won't belabor the point, but a couple of years before the radio debut, there was an office boy in Action Comics #6, an unnamed blonde-haired bow-tied office boy that retroactively considered the first appearance of the character, but not named at that point in time. And then we got the radio serial. And then very shortly after that, in 1941, in Superman #13, the comic book version of the character is named. And the sense that I get from the research and just the actual reading that I've done, pretty much a background character in those early golden age days.
Yeah.
There's one instance it's not Jimmy, but when we were going through the Fleischer shorts a while ago, there is Lewis.
Oh, okay.
The office boy in the animated version that is not the character and does have his own name, but again, seems to fill a very similar sort of role.
That's what I'm saying. You need it, right? Like you're writing a Superman story. At some point, you're going to be like, wait a second, he needs someone to talk to. Whether it's Lewis or TJ or whomever, it's like, everyone needs a pal.
Now, look, everything changes, as we said, with Jack Larson in Adventures of Superman. I want to spend at least a couple minutes on him because he deserves it. But before that, there were the Kirk Alyn serials in 1948, 1950. Have you ever watched these?
No, I have not.
We did an episode on them a couple of years ago. Every time they come up, I wish I had better things to say. I appreciate what they did at the time. But the Jimmy was played by Tommy Bond, an actor named Tommy Bond in that. And I think this was just a miscast because he looked more like a tough gangster type than what you would expect of Jimmy Olsen. So it was just off. But our first live action depiction of the character, and he was there.
Yeah.
So I guess there's something to be said for that, but it just felt off to me.
Yeah, well, I don't know how much of the character they had really defined at that point anyway, right? I feel like, what I know of it, Jimmy Olsen, as you and I are currently thinking of him, is Jack Larson, right? I mean, a lot of it comes right there. So I wonder too, like maybe the serials are just like, well, do we need this? Like we're not on radio anymore. Maybe we can skip this part. So.
Maybe. And yeah, so speaking of Jack Larson, so the George Reeves series runs from 1952 to 1958, 6 seasons, Jack Larson. And like I said, this really skyrockets the popularity of the character. And of course, we do our own side rewatch podcast, another exciting episode, which, by the way, by the time people hear this, our coverage of the color seasons is underway. So you can now listen on Thursdays to our season 3 breakdowns. Our mutual friend Rich Roney, and he's been a guest on this show many times. He's joining me for many of the color discussions. We've been having a lot of fun with that. How much experience do you have with Adventures of Superman?
Also none, unfortunately.
Man, really striking out here.
Well, I don't. Were they ever on like TV or reruns when we were kids?
I think there's some TV Land stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They have like even in our time growing up.
Okay.
But yes, generally speaking, access and availability can and have been issues in fairness. But yeah, I mean, we talk about that show and him a lot on that other show. I mean, you could see why he popped so much. I think Jack Larson really had a great comedic sensibility. Yeah. And I mean, this really falls into the category of the younger, less competent version of the character, a cub reporter for the most part. Occasionally we'll see him with a camera, but more so a cub reporter. Mr. Kent, Miss Lane. But there are some moments that like genuinely make me laugh. I mean, like I said, we're going through the color episodes. So there's one we recorded about not too long ago that like genuinely made me laugh, where Jimmy poses as a telephone repairman to get in with these criminals, and he's claiming like, oh, there's a problem with the line. I got to check the phone, and he's like, he takes a hammer and he's just like hitting the phone, and then he gets himself tangled up in the wire. Even if it's not my platonic ideal of what Jimmy Olsen needs to be, it's genuinely amusing and entertaining and a very endearing portrait of the character. And like I said, especially for that audience at that time, like I could see why that was such a big deal for a lot of people. Yeah. You know, and he was a staple of that show. I mean, that was, we were really focused very squarely on that Daily Planet quartet and Bill Henderson as well, but really that Daily Planet quartet. And so it was It was a lot, he's always running off to fetch coffee and sandwiches. Just a real helper. Good guy.
Well, that's his narrative strength, right? He gets to be funny because Clark can be the butt of jokes, but Superman really can, right? Superman isn't known for cracking a smile and anything else, but Jimmy can. Jimmy can be like, I can mouth off to all these crooks however I want. The unbeatable man's going to come and rescue me. We know that. So, let's have some fun with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun fact, people who follow Adventures of Superman, this is the old hat, but after the untimely, tragic passing of George Reeves after season 6 of Adventures of Superman, one of the ideas that producers entertained to keep the franchise going was a Jimmy Olsen series starring Jack Larson, which would have used recycled Reeves footage and a body double to fill in for Superman. And Larson, he's talked about this in many interviews. He found it to be a ghoulish idea and he turned it down. And ultimately, I think that was the right call, particularly this notion of trying to shoot around George Reeves. That's the aspect of it. I think, especially at that point, I think Larson as Jimmy could have carried a series.
Yeah.
I just think they could have, it would have needed to be something where Superman's always just off on another mission, or you send Jimmy to another DC universe city, and then you don't have to worry about that, and then you can just follow him. So I think there could have been potential there, but I'm glad that he stuck to his guns and honored his friend and coworker in not pursuing that, because I think that would have been messed up. But yeah, that gives rise to Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, which launches in 1954. The very earliest issues are available on the DC app, and I just took a look at the first issue. Very mundane.
Yeah.
There are jewel thieves that he's investigating and he figures out that they stashed their loot at the bottom of a lake. They're fine stories, but we're not yet into the Silver Age wackiness.
Yeah.
So it's not dissimilar from what I encountered when we went through the early Golden Age Superboy stories.
Yeah.
Where there's a little girl, no one's come to her birthday party. It's that's her story. Where there's another kid who's trying to win a derby and Superboy helps him. It's just very, very, very pedestrian stories. So that's kind of the sense that I got of what it was like at the time. And then we get into the Silver Age.
Yes, we do.
On the comic book front. Have you, the answer might be no, and that's okay. But have you read many, if any of those Silver Age Jimmy Olsen tales where he undergoes his many transformations, which I would argue, if you're talking about staples of the character, that boyishness, the bow tie, the red hair, though we don't always get that, and the loyalty and the zaniness, the transformations. Are you familiar with these stories?
Yeah, no, I am. I read collected editions and stuff over the years. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel? Because it was such a thing. And so much so, in fact, that off to the side here, I have a now out of print trade, but one that I'm very glad I was able to track down on eBay. It's called The Amazing Transformations of Jimmy Olsen, and it collects a bunch of these Silver Age stories where he transforms into the giant turtle man or a wolf man or a porcupine, or he becomes giant sized, or his brain gets giant sized, or he is aged up, or he gets elastic powers, or he's turned into a Bizarro Jimmy. It goes on and on.
Yeah.
And this trade collects a bunch of them. And then, in fact, really just very recently, as of this recording, DC put out a Superman family trade paperback collection in their DC Finest line, which collects some of the same stories, a bunch of other Jimmy stories, and a bunch of other stories featuring Lois and Lana and Crypto and whatnot. And I'm really, really happy to have that in my collection as well. But yeah, just overall, I guess, thoughts, feelings about that aspect of Jimmy's history, the transformation piece.
I like them. I like them a lot because you can't do a Superman adjacent story where no one does anything awesome, right? And with this, eventually they hit on the idea where it's like, oh, this kid's malleable. We can put him through whatever we want as long as he stays himself. So I always thought the transformations were cool. My favorite one is actually in All-Star Superman, where he turns into Doomsday. And the very last scene is when he comes to, he's like, don't tell Superman this happened. Don't tell him that he went rogue or whatever. And it's like, I buy that. I buy that Jimmy could be part of the worst day this guy's ever had, and still his main concern is for his pal. So I thought they were great. I thought they really helped to codify Jimmy Olsen as a Superman supporting character.
Yeah. I feel like this is one of those things where a few years ago, if you had asked me, I would have said, I've seen some of these covers, silly, not for me. But I think two things have shifted. One, I've learned how to appreciate and access those Silver Age stories and just kind of enjoy them for what they are. And not that I'm laughing at them, but they do yield some laughs as I'm reading. Like, oh, this is great. Like, I'm genuinely enjoying them. So that's number one. And then number two is that, and I'm glad you mentioned the All-Star issue, because that's one of my favorite Jimmy Olsen stories. And in that and honestly, even the Fraction series as well, where there's a key moment as part of the inciting incident of the whole story where he's transformed into a giant turtle man. So it's like, now you get these modern stories that are paying homage to these weird transformations, but there's vastly more meat on the bone now. And now it serves a more specific story function and it is able to bring out more in the character. So there's more of a point to it, as opposed to, okay, it'll be weird to see him like this for an issue. But I don't know that you get that if you don't have that Silver Age backdrop to draw from. So I've really gained, a lot more appreciation for it. And, that All-Star issue by Morrison and Quietly at number 4, I mean, that hits on all the things like that I think I was kind of talking about, where there you have a successful Jimmy Olsen with his Sunday feature, his For a Day feature, where he'll spend a day in all these different roles, and he fills in for Leo Quintum at the DNA Project in that issue. And then Superman gets exposed to black kryptonite and goes bad, and Superboy injects himself with the stem cell accelerator, something to that effect, that transforms him into Doomsday. Yeah. And helps put an end to Superman's rampage. And then when Superman is returning to normal, Jimmy's character, he doesn't want anyone to take a picture to see Superman like that. So protective of him in multiple ways. But and at the same time, his love life's a mess. He's having a hard time holding on to Lucy Lane. Yep. He then asks for that cosmetic alteration of the moon to say, I love Lucy. Like, it just, that to me, beautiful encapsulation of, I think, all of the different dynamics when it comes to Jimmy Olsen.
Yeah. And the all the changes are good too, because when they realize, like, oh, hey, this is something we can put him through. It wasn't just him, like Superman would go through it too with like his red kryptonite and everything else. It was like everyone back then was transforming constantly just to see what they could get away with, because this is also at the height of the comic code. It's like, you can't do a lot of violent stories or whatever. So we got to let the imagination wander if we're going to come up with content,
So I'm not going to do a whole thing like going through all of those Silver Age transformations, but I will say to the audience, if that's something that you would be interested in, write in and let me know, because I don't think I would need too much arm twisting. But I did read through a few, specifically the Giant Turtle Man and the Elastic Lad issues from the Silver Age. I read those because those to me felt like the most quintessential Silver Age Jimmy Olsen transformations. And it's just funny throughout all of these, though, even the ones that I just skimmed through, there's always some potion, serum, gas, ray that Jimmy's just always too curious about and can't help himself, despite going through this time after time. Yeah. I mean, specifically with the Elastic Lad issue, it's like Superman brings this chest that he found in space to Jimmy to do a story on, and then he's like, oh, I have to go, but be careful. And Jimmy opens it, and I think, though, this is a secret sauce to Jimmy, because he opens it and he sees a container with a glowing green liquid, and he understandably thinks it's kryptonite. And so it's not that he's just this numbnut who's screwing around with stuff. Like, he wants to protect Superman. He wants to get rid of this, but unfortunately he trips and douses himself in this, and then he starts to develop these elastic powers. But I think my favorite part of this issue is that I swear, it was slightly nebulous as to the passage of time, but I'm almost positive it was that same night where he started to stretch and everything. And he's like, I'm a freak. I'll go get a job at the carnival. Like, the same night. I mean, he just didn't waste any time. And then there's this mobster in the audience who recognizes Elastic Lad as Jimmy Olsen, and then poses as a scientist and tricks him into committing these crimes because he's claiming that he can cure Jimmy's affliction. And at a certain point, Jimmy's exposed to kryptonite, and it turns out that can counter effect the elixir, and he's normal again. But it was just like, that aspect of it really made me laugh. And then I know moving forward, he'll use that potion on himself, and he'll use a very specific dosage so he can control it more.
He joins the Legion, I think.
Yeah, that was another issue that I read where he becomes an honorary member, where he gets seemingly abducted by this bad guy who is able to materialize all of the other Jimmy Olsens, like all of these other transformations that he's undergone. He's confronted with them face to face. But then Jimmy deduces that they're actually members of the Legion of Superheroes in disguise. So one of the transformations that Jimmy goes through, which would not play today, is as Fat Boy.
Ah,
And it turns out that's actually Bouncing Boy posing as him and whatnot. And it plays out from there. And this was all part of his initiation because the Legion basically are jerks, right? And we love the Legion, but yeah, they put him through this as this initiation and they make him an honorary member. So that was a fun one. And you know, then that idea of him being confronted with all of the different versions of himself, that to me kind of called to mind one of the vignettes from the Fraction series where he's in therapy.
Yeah.
And the therapist is talking about like all these different versions of him. And he's the photojournalist, he's the investigator, he's the prankster, he's all of these other versions through these transformations. So it kind of made me think of that, which was cool. But yeah, the Legion issue.
Did you read the one where he and Superman go to Kandor as the original Nightwing and Flamebird?
Not for this specifically, but Rich and I looked at that when we did our Kandor episode a while back. Yeah, yeah. So that's so not a transformation per se, unless you count the miniaturization. But yeah, he and Superman become Nightwing and Flamebird. Yeah. So fighting side by side in the Battle City.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you put him in a costume and tell him he's a bad guy, he can play superhero.
Yeah. Oh, there's another one. This was great where he's turned into Bizarro Jimmy, do you remember this?
I do remember this, yeah.
Where this was more of a skim for me, so I might be a little shaky on the details, but there's a scientist, I don't know if it was Potter, because Potter is one who pops up in a lot of these Jimmy stories. Yeah. I don't know if it was Potter for this one specifically, but this scientist is trying to create a normalizer ray to turn Bizarros into regular humans. But it's not working right, something like that. But Jimmy, I guess this is a prank, or I don't know. He puts on a Bizarro mask, and the idea is he's going to expose himself to this ray and then take off the mask and make it seem like, hey, the ray works. You turned this Bizarro Jimmy into a human, right? I think that's the idea. But then he ends up getting turned into, I think it just backfires because when that ray is turned on a human, it has the opposite, right? It turns him into a Bizarro, and then he ends up on. These stories are great. And as I always say, right, I don't partake in any substances, right? But I do feel like if you were like a little stoned reading these, like he'd be amazing.
Yeah.
But so he ends up on Bizarro World, and he then uses the original duplicator ray on that scientist to create a Bizarro version of the scientist. And then that Bizarro version of the scientist creates an unnormalizer ray, which turns Bizarro Jimmy back into Jimmy. I mean, these things are like, they're so fun. Like you gotta just have fun with these.
Yeah.
Which I always wish I could go back and tell my younger self that. It's like, just have fun with these, man.
Yeah.
I guess the last Silver Age story that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is from an issue of Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, but it's the reveal of the first time Jimmy and Superman met. I never read there's spanking involved. So it turns out these are so weird where like Jimmy answers an ad in a newspaper to test out a device, which turns out to be a time machine. And so it's not even the regular scientists we're used to. It's just like some random scientist who put an ad in the paper. And because things move through space, there's a spatial displacement aspect to this where it's not just traveling through time. And so he ends up on Krypton before it's destroyed.
Oh yeah, of course.
And becomes Baby Kal-El's babysitter. And at one point, Baby Kal-El is pressing the button on the food fabricator and too much is coming out. And then the next scene is Super Baby on Jimmy's leg getting a spanking. But Jimmy ends up protecting the House of L from being captured by the agents of the Science Council. And that allows them to get Baby Kal-El off the planet in time. And Jimmy doesn't remember any of this when he returns to the present because through time travel, you lose all your memories.
Sure, of course. But
Superman, because he has super memory, super recall, he remembers all of this. And he even chides Jimmy at the end for the spanking. So wild stuff. But I mean, yeah, I feel like those Silver Age stories, man. I mean, like that's, I think, just such a core part of Jimmy Olsen. And like we're saying, like they give rise to so many of these modern stories. That
But they're very imaginative as well. You know, it's like you got one issue, you got one deadline, you got 20 some odd pages, make something self-contained and make it good. So.
Yeah. So I would say that's the hallmark of Silver Age, Jimmy. And then we get into the Bronze Age. And this is where you've got one over on me because I've really not yet immersed myself in Jack Kirby's Fourth World.
Oh, okay.
But of course he has this run on the Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen series and reintroduces the Newsboy Legion and Guardian and the Wild Area and all this stuff. And I mean, I'll toss it to you. I mean, what stands out to you the most, just big picture about that era?
I mean, Darkseid gets introduced in Jimmy Olsen's Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. You know, there's no getting around that. Darkseid, the big bad of the DCU, adapted into everything they have a name for. He premieres in Jimmy Olsen. You know, he's the man behind the curtain. He's the big bad, but there's no question he is right there. The thing I love most, and that's how I got introduced to the characters when I went back and I read The Fourth World, is that it's the same Silver Age idea of what is the most imaginative, crazy thing we can throw this kid in, but Jimmy's unchanged and unfazed, and he goes to the Wild Area, and he goes to Cadmus, and he goes to the Harrys, and he goes to Apocalypse and everything else, and he's like, oh, cool. Okay, what does Superman need me to do to help to save everyone and move on to the next thing? And it's really good. And even though, you know, Kirby didn't create Jimmy Olsen, he certainly didn't create Superman, he integrates these characters into his big mythology. And then when he leaves Olsen and he just goes to just the New Gods and everything else, it doesn't feel like, oh, we're finally getting started. It feels like, oh no, Superman and Jimmy had their part to play. They were instrumental in that. Now we've moved on to something else. So just this very natural outflow of like, no, man, there are Bronze Age, Silver Age stories where Jimmy is front and center in the battle against Darkseid. You know, he's not the character who lives in the margins that he would be post-crisis almost to today.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I like that idea of him, like I said, just kind of having this story going on, right? And being that involved in the goings on of the wider DC universe. Yeah, the Fourth World Saga is something that we have work to do on that front, and we'll get there and you'll be involved and we'll talk about it. But I only read Kirby's first issue in preparation for this just to get a little bit of a feel for it. So we're talking Bronze Age, obviously during the 70s and then towards the end of the 80s, right? We have the Christopher Reeve movie series. So we have Mark McClure as Jimmy Olsen in the 4 Superman films and the Supergirl movie as well, where he has the most play.
Oh yeah, right.
Overall, I guess I don't have that much to say about the Mark McClure version. He's solid. I mean, I think he's what you generally would expect. I just don't know that there's a ton there.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest. I mean, there are moments, especially in the first movie, where I think certainly in The Office, Jimmy is the nicest to Clark.
Yeah.
So that was kind of nice to see. There's it's a genuinely funny moment at Superman 3 when they're on the bus to Smallville.
Okay.
And Jimmy's going on about his family dynamics and whatnot. And Clark clearly is like bored out of his mind and can't wait to get off the bus. I don't know. I mean, it's not a great moment for Jimmy, but it's a great moment involving Jimmy where it allows, I think, for some humanity from Clark, where it's it's not, his patience isn't infinite.
Yeah. Yeah. That version always struck me as like, okay, Clark was an only child, but if he had to have a younger brother, here he is, here's this work friend that he hangs around with a lot. So,
and that's the thing, I think. And maybe this is more of an issue when we're talking about the film side of things, because space is limited. It's different when you have an ongoing episodic series. You can give Jimmy a spotlight. You can have an ongoing subplot, whatever it might be. Yeah. Same thing in the comics with the Triangle Era. You've got 4 books to work with. He can have a storyline where he's homeless for multiple months. And but when you're down to 1 or 2 books, it's like, well, now space is much more limited. So I do appreciate that. But I guess I look at the Reeve film series, and there's nothing wrong with that version of Jimmy. Like, perfectly fine, solid, down the middle version of the character. Yeah. But I think it does leave something on the table in terms of what you can do with the character. Like when we look at All-Star Superman, when we look at this Fraction series, there's more that can be mined. And so I think sometimes, and I extend this to Perry White as well. I feel like Perry and Jimmy are 2 characters where it's easy to often kind of do what you need to do for the character and kind of tap into the core of what people are expecting from them, but to not really explore as much as you can. And it becomes a bit more one note. Years ago now, we did an episode on the Tom Welling cameo in Crisis on Infinite Earths, where they gave him the Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow ending. And so in that discussion, we talked about Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. And of course, famously in that final pre-crisis storyline by Alan Moore that puts a bow on that iteration of Superman and all of his characters, Jimmy meets his end defending Superman from this attack. And he's far from the only one. I mean, that story is quite a bloodbath. Yeah. But for Jimmy in particular, he and Lana go out together where he uses that serum to once again transform himself into Elastic Lad, and Lana gives herself powers. And I guess looking at this pre-crisis version that we've been talking about now for the past half hour or so, that the finale that he's given and whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, I'm just curious how that sits with you.
Oh, I mean, again, I feel like there's nothing to get wrapped up, right? It's like, he gets superpowers, he defends his friend, and he goes down. But again, there's nothing uniquely Jimmy about it. Whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow is great because Lois gets a good end, Lana gets a good end, even Perry.
No, Lana gets killed too.
No, I know she dies, but she dies because she overhears
yes.
just as the hearing kicks in, and she knows, like, oh, it wasn't me. You know what? I'm going out in a blaze of glory. And that's probably the best Lana story I've ever read. So, it's different for Jimmy, where it's just like, no, Jimmy's ride or die no matter what. So of course he's on the front lines of battle, but again, there's not a lot to do with him because again, he's like your friend, he's not in it for something. It's like, he's going to be here for you as long as you need him.
Yeah, we've talked about whatever happened when we did our episode. Then I did a standalone episode on it, and there's kind of a third discussion that I think is still to be had about that work, but because I've thought about it a lot and I've kind of gone back and forth over the years, and yeah, the carnage in that book is one of those things where I do kind of question whether that's truly the most fitting end for a particular characters. And I think Jimmy is a good example where could there not have been another path for him? But there is that moment. I agree with you. The Lana moment is far more powerful, but there is a moment where Jimmy says to Lana, he's like, all these years they've called me Superman's friend. It's time I started paying for that privilege. And just this notion of like, yeah, he's got his back. He's going to go out there, regardless of how it ultimately plays out when he's in the battlefield. But I really did like that line about paying for the privilege. I mean, I didn't need for him to pay for it with his life, but just kind of that sense I thought was really powerful.
I like that Jimmy at his best iterations is written to protect Superman the way Superman wants to protect everyone. And I feel like that's a really good nuanced way of Jimmy's smart enough to know like, hey, most things he's going to be okay for, but it's like, I'm still going to protect, I'm still very protective of him. So I always thought that was good. Cause again, it comes back to like the 1 out of 100 times where he is going to need someone to remove a hunk of kryptonite off his chest or something. That's Jimmy. He's fearless. He's going to go in there. He's probably going to make it out.
And this notion of like, what should Jimmy be? He should be someone who Clark/Superman can ask for help. Yeah. Going back to that All-Star issue, Jim, I'm in a jam, right? Like he could be your go-to guy. I like that.
Yeah. I said this very early on, but it's like, when I started learning about early DC, I was like, why is he not on the Teen Titans? Like, he's a teenager. He's got a cool little bow. He's, it's like, why is he just not Mr. Action on the Teen Titans? And obviously he doesn't have a real superhero identity, but in my mind, it's like, nah, man, most of these kids don't have a lot of powers. This guy's got a cool watch and he's constantly turning into kaiju. So why not?
It is interesting. One of I don't know how much of a theory this is versus a gag. I don't know, but I saw online speculation, quote unquote speculation, that the kaiju in James Gunn's Superman is actually a transformed Jimmy Olsen.
Oh, I like that. Oh, okay.
So we'll see.
I thought it was called Superman Legacy until the last time we recorded. I'm so behind the times on all this
stuff.
It's
not technically it's just Superman, but I am really sticking to calling it James Gunn's Superman. Yeah. To clarify which film we're talking about, but also I don't think he'd have it any other way, to be honest with you, man. You know what I mean? He's in all the marketing materials, all these behind the scenes. It's always James right there. Creature Commandos, you get him in animated form during the credits. He's there. So I think if he had his way, the film would be called James Gunn's Superman. And that's how I'm going to refer to it.
I love that, man. I would love for that. If that would make me very happy. That would probably make me more excited for the movie.
There you go. All right. And so then that brings us into the modern era, the post-crisis version of comics and other media that you and I grew up in. And of course, Jimmy is a regular fixture in the Triangle era books. And obviously that's way too much for us to really go through in particular detail. All I'll kind of say, and I'll toss this to you, like when I think of post-crisis kind of modern era Jimmy Olsen and the Triangle era specifically, I guess the storylines or subplots that stand out to me the most, his bout with homelessness was definitely one. the stretch where he grew frustrated with his lack of opportunity and being taken seriously at the planet, and he quits and he gets a job at GBS and becomes known as Mr. Action, which was something that happened. He was Mr. Action in the Bronze Age as well, which I actually I don't think I was aware of until now, but in this Triangle era storyline, he becomes Mr. Action and really starts to compromise his values in chasing the story. And it's really kind of, that whole stretch was very much kind of like the battle for the soul of Jimmy Olsen. And it gets to a point where he's convinced he knows Superman's secret identity. And the reader realizes he thinks it's Colin Thornton, who's actually Satanus.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
But Jimmy is convinced that the Colin Thornton is Superman, and he has this whole TV special and he's interviewing Clark Kent. And it really seems to the other characters, and actually, you know what? Even to I don't know, the reader at that point might not be sure who Jimmy thinks it is. So there might have been some tension there as to, does he actually know it? Does he think it's Clark? Anyway. But anyway, it's really building to this. And then ultimately he doesn't go through with it because he has to be loyal to his friend.
Yeah,
and the big twist is Superman has no secret identity, right? And then he loses his job and all of that. And eventually he'll come back to the Jimmy Olsen that we know and love. But yeah, like that one was a particularly strong storyline, I thought, because it really, I think it felt believable that he would want to spread his wings and it felt like he wasn't getting what was owed him. And then to kind of be in that position where he's not under the protective umbrella of Perry and Jimmy and Lois, and not Jimmy, Perry and Clark and Lois. And you kind of see the different directions that takes him in. So like, that's another one that I think really stood out to me. Any Triangle era stuff that
the death of Superman,
the photo,
which just broke my heart even when I was a kid and I was reading that, and you hear Jimmy saying that's it, that's the first headline of my obituary if I live to be 150 years old, and it's the worst picture. I wish I didn't have to take it, but now every time I'm going to be seeing it forever. And it just breaks his heart that, his friend, possibly his best friend, died saving everyone. Doesn't seem like he's coming back, and Jimmy's just constantly being talked about how like, oh, you took the picture, you captured that moment, and Jimmy's like, yeah, that was the worst day of my life, and that always struck me. Past that, the only other memory I have of that era was he on Lois and Clark, and was he like wildly out of character on that show?
Well, yeah, he was on Lois and Clark, and there was a recast. So Michael Landis played him in season 1, and then they recast him with Justin Whalen because the way the story goes, they felt that the original actor looked too much like Dean Cain.
Oh, that's interesting.
But that's the story. So you did have two different versions of Jimmy, and obviously that show itself had a change in showrunners and the big shift between season 1 and season 2. And they did a little bit, tried to do more on the superhero action side of things as opposed to the first season. But so I mean, we did have two different versions of Jimmy. I mean, I would say that the season 1 Jimmy on Lois and Clark was older, felt more in line with Lois and Clark generally.
Okay.
I'm due for a rewatch. I might feel differently, but he also had a little bit, I think there was a little more maturity and a little bit more of an edge and a sarcastic wit to the character.
That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah. Okay.
Versus the Justin Whalen incarnation, who was younger and played as younger and was more of just kind of the lovable goof sort of thing. And obviously had a very kind of father-son dynamic with Perry White.
Yeah.
It's funny, as a kid, I think I always gravitated more towards the Justin Whalen version. I don't know, maybe because I was a kid and he felt, I mean, I don't know. But now what I have rewatched in recent years, I think the season 1 incarnation was definitely a more interesting version of the character.
Okay. Yeah, that's I don't even know why I remember that. I think I must have just caught a couple ones I was like, that's Jimmy Olsen. That's not your father's Jimmy Olsen right there. So
yeah. And then look, there are a couple of moments we've talked about a lot very recently as we went through the Loeb Kelly era again, but when Jimmy gets that photo of Superman wearing his wedding ring, right? And then he doctors it to protect him, but the photo gets out anyway because of Lex. But I love that. And then I loved when Superman confided in Jimmy. He's like, hey, I am actually married, right? Because there's this whole cover story that the JLA concocts that like, oh, we all wear these bands. They're communicators. Right. And that's kind of the end of it. And that could have been the end of it. But Superman wanted to confide in Jimmy. He's like, I am married. And I always love that because in my mind, it's like, hey, Jimmy could know the secret and really be in on it. But if we're not going to go all the way, if we can't, for whatever reason, I kind of like the notion of at least letting him in a little bit. I thought it was cool. And then I've quoted this moment recently as well, but you brought up the bit about the death of Superman photo. There's a really nice flip of that in Critical Condition during the Loeb Kelly era where Superman is dying of kryptonite poisoning. He's in the Star Labs operating theater and Jimmy has the opportunity to take the shot and he doesn't.
Yeah.
And he says under his breath, he's like, I'm sorry, Perry. Like, I can't do it. So I love knowing what we know about what he went through.
Yeah,
when he's placed in a similar position, he makes a different choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought that was really great. And then, we talked about that secret origin moment where he talks about being from Yonkers.
From Yonkers, New York.
But that too, not unlike that Fraction Lieber moment I talked about horsing around with you is the only fun I get to have. There too, Jimmy and Superman are in a very similar spot where their time in Metropolis is not going the way that they wanted. Superman just made his public debut. Lex is calling him out, asking him if he's even human.
Yeah.
Everyone's speculating about him. Like, he's at a very low point. He feels like, I really made a mistake here. Jimmy, similarly, job's not going the way he wants it to. He doesn't have a network there yet. And so they kind of have, and Superman says, like, I just got here. Like, I'd hate to lose the only friend I've made so far. And then Jimmy asks Superman to pose for photos. He's like, I've really been trying not to do that. And Jimmy's like, well, it would really help. And he does it. I know I've not been the hottest on Secret Origin over the years, but that's a moment that everything really sings.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good moment. I think John's really nailed him in that book, for all the other complaints we might have about it.
Yeah. And then we said, the New 52 version, I think was really solid in terms of that friendship. And that's also, correct me if I'm wrong, the New 52, that's where they established the wealthy family. Yes. Right, that he comes from money. Because previously, certainly in the Triangle era, I think the whole thing was his father was a government agent, right? And his mother was just kind of struggling to get by and whatnot. Yeah. But then we had this whole business, which will play into the Fraction series where they take it to a whole other level. Just kind of this notion of Jimmy coming from means. Just kind of an intriguing idea. I guess that's one of the other things with Jimmy that's tough because his backstory, not that it's the most critical piece of the character, but it changed a lot. So although I could say that for other characters as well.
The way I took it in the New 52 was that they wanted to do a compare and contrast. Like, if they were both from, middle class or low class backgrounds, it's like, whatever. It's like, well, why don't we make Jimmy wealthy? And Clark's been taught not to trust the wealthy, Lex, everyone else. But Jimmy's going to show him, like, no, I'm a completely normal person. I had a normal upbringing. I just don't have to worry about rent the way you do. So that's how I read it.
Yeah. So obviously this came before the New 52, but just backtracking for a second, you had mentioned Superman Returns. But so yes, during the run of Smallville, we had the Superman Returns movie and Sam Huntington playing the character. And yeah, I liked that version. I mean, I guess the scene that sticks out the most is Clark and Jimmy going out to get a beer, which I guess is in line with what I generally
Isn't the old
for.
Jimmy in that? Isn't he the bartender?
Yeah, Jack Larson is the bartender. Okay. Yeah, but again, I mean, I don't know, I feel like there's another instance. I mean, it's been a while since I rewatched it, so maybe it's just not ringing a bell. But I mean, I'm hard pressed to say what else that Jimmy was about or had to do in that instance. But I really did like the actor.
Me too. Yeah. Hey, man, I always thought it was a crime we didn't get a sequel to Superman Returns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. My love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one Smallville podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring great insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode, and the podcast will continue with more great Smallville and Superman talk even after their series coverage concludes. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, Star Wars, and more. Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. I guess while we're back in that pre-New 52 territory real quick, I'll just also say that Jimmy was the headliner of the Superman Metropolis maxi series written by Chuck Austen.
Chuck Austen.
You and I've been promising / threatening this for years. I've finally decided to pull the trigger on it. You and I are going to talk about the Chuck Austen, I can't call it an era, Chuck Austen's work on Superman. His Action Comics run, he was on it for a year. And this year-long Superman Metropolis maxi series, which is from the perspective of Jimmy and dealt with all the B-13 tech and whatnot. I did reread the first issue just for purposes of this discussion that we're having. And yeah, it held up. It was good. For all of our, not I know you are a defender of the Chuck Austin stuff, but for all of my bashing, no, that first issue I actually thought was solid. And there's, as you might recall, right, it opens with this governor who's going to be running for senator, and he's shot at a press conference, and Jimmy springs into action to get a shot, to get, not a gunshot, but to get a photo. Yeah. And I think the two things that stood out to it, one, we get Jimmy's narration, and he talks about essentially like what sets him apart, right? Because he moves instantly, whereas the others are disoriented, they're getting their bearings. He's already on the move.
Yeah.
Right. So he's been in these kinds of situations. He's hardened by the experiences that he's had, and he can push through that. But then the fact that he doesn't try to help, right? He's there to get the shot, and that arouses the ire of the wife of the victim and whatnot. But it was just kind of interesting thinking about the ethical side of this and kind of the lengths that he'll go to get the shot. So I thought it was interesting. I enjoyed it. It made me more optimistic about the rest of that maxi series, which I read back in the day, but I never went back to. So it makes me more optimistic about that and the Austin run overall. But yeah, I mean, Superman Metropolis, like an instance where he carried a book.
Yeah. And again, it was kind of the original, 12-issue Jimmy Olsen series. It unfortunately didn't do that well, but who knows? I mean, honestly, sales figure wise, it wouldn't shock me to know the two were on equal footing.
Yeah. And then as far as what else has been going on for Jimmy in the recent era, I think we've already hit on most of this. I mean, certainly in the realm of other media, obviously we talked about Smallville, we talked about the Arrowverse, My Adventures with Superman. I mean, Batman v Superman in 2016, and once again, the extended cut really at least gives you more. But yes, I mean, that Jimmy Olsen is an undercover CIA agent.
Which is awesome. That's a great premise.
So it's how quickly he is killed. That's the sticking point.
Why even name that character Jimmy Olsen? Why not name, again, I call him Agent Jim Harper. Agent Jim Harper died in the line. It's like, why?
I know. No, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's one of those things where maybe the thought was, well, we're not planning to do anything else with him. So at least you got a taste of Jimmy Olsen. I mean, I don't know, but it's not to speak for you, but it sounds like you just would have preferred, well, then we don't have to have Jimmy Olsen at all. Like, don't throw him in there to kill him off like that.
Right. Because it doesn't seem to me like, hey, I want to have a cameo of him. It sounds like this is something from the Superman mythology I don't like. So I'm going to bring him in and I'm going to kill him off. Like, to me, it seemed very petty. And for all my complaints about that movie, I don't have a lot of complaints about Zack Snyder as a person. So it always just struck me as like, why punch down like that? Like, if you don't want to use Jimmy Olsen, you don't want to use Robin, just don't use them. Like, it doesn't, like, I don't understand why introduce him and then kill him off. It seems like something I would have done as a teenager at the height of something and just been like, oh, we don't need that guy anymore. You just get rid of him. And I'm glad he died in Kingdom Come. It just, it reflected back on me the worst impulses I would have had when I was younger.
All right, I hear you. I mean, I guess it didn't bother me per se, but your point is well taken. I mean, it's one of those things where the way they used him, there was room. It could have been the case that wasn't actually Jimmy Olsen. That was a CIA agent who used that name as a cover, and the real Jimmy Olsen is there. I don't get the sense though that Snyder had an intention to use him anywhere else. But yeah, I mean, that could have been an opportunity that wasn't explored.
What I was hoping, obviously this wasn't going to happen, was, later on when in that movie, when Superman can't move because the kryptonite spear of destiny is sitting on top of him and they had Lois come in and risk her life. It's like, well, that's when Agent Olsen should come in and save his pal and just be like, you thought I was dead. Well, I'm not. And then he takes the spear and then he goes off and the Super Friends save the day. But,
yeah,
man,
in the current, bringing us all the way to the present day, in the current Joshua Williamson run on the Superman title, Jimmy's been getting, I think, a decent amount of play and has been in a romantic relationship with a reformed Silver Banshee, which I think is cool. Yeah. So, but
who's not Lucy Lane, presumably?
No,
right?
no,
Still
no.
Siobhan.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right. So shall we now segue and have a more specific discussion about the Who Killed Jimmy Olsen series? Now, you and I talked off mic. We purposely are not going to spoil the question in the title of the book. We're not going to say who killed, or more appropriately, who tried to have Jimmy Olsen killed, for two reasons. One, there's so much going on in the book. The answer to that, I would argue, is like one of the most, is one of the least important, least interesting aspects of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And also because, like I said, in putting the call out and we're not getting any responses, I do get the sense that maybe not a lot of people have experienced it. And so if we can kind of hold back that one piece, maybe that will encourage people to check it out. And I would definitely encourage them to do that. All that being said, I think one of the beautiful things about this book is you and I could talk at length. I guess we will, but we could talk at length about Who Killed Jimmy Olsen and talk about its nonlinear structure and all of the various ticks and developments and all that stuff. But I still think this is one book more than a lot of others where a description is really not the same as the feel that you get of experiencing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I wouldn't know what the one sentence summary would be. I feel that way with most of Matt Fraction's comics, but this one in particular, other than to say it's 12 issues of Jimmy and random shenanigans. But yeah, as far as I'm never bored reading it, but it would be very difficult to describe and sell to someone else.
Yeah, it's fine. I was thinking about this. I'm like, well, how do I set this up? And how do I talk about this? Because it really is all over the place, but there's a method to the madness and it really does all tie together. So I don't want to say it's messy, because it's not. It really all ties together in a very satisfying way. But
it's very tightly plotted. I mean, it may seem, before you mentioned Tarantino, I hadn't considered that, but that is the perfect description. Because again, everything introduced is wrapped up. You got to stick with it, but if you can get to the end of issue 12, it's like, oh, I saw the whole movie. This could very well be an animated feature.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Each issue is comprised of multiple vignettes. And like we said, they don't play in a linear fashion, but they do ultimately make sense. They are all pieces of a whole. Each vignette starts with its own, for lack of a better term, title page, where you get usually a pretty wordy, but in a fun way, caption that's setting everything up. Very similar to what you would get at the beginning of a lot of those pre-crisis Silver Age stories in particular. And I would say the majority of them start with, "What's this?" Which this might be too long of a walk for the payoff, but that really tickled me because did you watch The Many Saints of Newark, the Sopranos prequel movie?
I have never seen a minute of any Sopranos project.
Okay. So it's great. It's we didn't watch it until the pandemic. That was one of our pandemic binges.
Okay.
And that's one of those things you hear people talk about. You're like, how could it possibly be that good? It legitimately, it exceeded my expectations. It was so good. The prequel movie, which came out just a few years ago, The Many Saints of Newark, not as strong. That for me, that left a lot to be desired, but it was still interesting. And anyway, there's a scene where young Tony Soprano, he's learned about his father's criminal ways and he's put off by this. And so he's throwing the stuff that his father has bought him out the window. And his father walks up, father played by John Bernthal.
Oh, okay.
We love him. And he's like, "What's going on?" And Tony's like, "I want no part of this. No part of this." And his dad goes, "This? What this?" And the "what this" has become a running gag with my wife and I. So like if we see someone parked poorly or whatever it is, like, "What this? What this?" So anyway, I was in my glory with all of those captions. I was like, this is great. So that little bit was very entertaining. I would say, because there are various threads, right, throughout all of this. One of the most fascinating ones to me, and we were alluding to this before, is the Olsen family backstory that we get, that Jimmy Olsen is the scion of this wealthy Olsen dynasty that was one of the first families of Metropolis. They were among the original settlers of Old Oberstad.
New Oberstad.
Oberstad, that eventually became Metropolis. And Jimmy has his older brother, Julian, and his sister, Janie, who's a playwright. And it just reframed Jimmy and his family in a completely different way, where now it's like the Olsens and the Luthers.
Yeah.
Right. And there's all this bad blood between their families, and Julian and Lex have their various maneuvering as they're at heads over policies in Metropolis and whatnot. And it was just one of those, even if you look at the New 52, where we find out, Jimmy comes from money, this is just a whole other realm. And I thought it was it was fascinating to position Jimmy and the family in that way. How did that play for you?
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was a great way of saying, well, Jimmy needs not only an arch rival, but he needs someone familiar to play off of. So it's like, well, we're going to set him up to be just as big a foe with Lex as Superman. And so I really enjoyed that. Also, I just love the gag of every generation of Luthor being dicks. Like it didn't start with Lex. Like Lex is the latest one in a long line of people who are just always awful in the worst ways. And that just landed for me.
Yeah, right. So what we find out through these flashbacks is that the Olsens, spelled differently initially, were among the initial settlers, but then you had new money in the form of the Alexanders at that time. Lutheus? How do we say it? Lutheus Alexander?
Oh, Lutheus. Yeah, that's how I was pronouncing it.
So then we have the Alexanders, new money coming in and trying to essentially take the land from the Olsens, and they throw them off a cliff.
Yeah.
Old Joachim Olsen, right?
Oh, Joachim Olsen. Yeah,
right? They throw him off a cliff, seemingly for dead, but then it turns out he survives and he hits the mother lode of gold.
Yeah.
Right. And that establishes their fortune. And then he tars and feathers Joachim and runs the Luthor, what will become the Luthor clan, out of town until they return generations later.
But and there's some nuance there too, because the new money doesn't just come in and take it away. They bribe elected officials.
Right.
And it establishes the Luthors as people who will always use the law against you. And then Olsen doesn't want to tar and feather him. Olsen says, oh, I'm going to kill you. Like, I'm just going to put you in the ground right now. And the rest of the people are like, nah, that's a bad omen. That's going to cause more trouble. Why don't we just kick him out of town? So I do like the original juxtaposition of the Luthors being like, well, we're going to get what we want no matter what we have to abuse to get it. And the Olsens being more of the earth, being like, no, I'm going to kill you and bury you here. No one's ever going to even know, we had a fight. So I thought that was an interesting way to lead up to Jimmy, who's very much about law, order, fair play, and justice. And Lex, who's just Lex, who doesn't care about anything other than himself.
Yeah, no. That's a great insight. Yeah, no, I mean, we like the version of Jimmy who comes from Yonkers and moves in New York, to Metropolis. But yeah, no, there's something to be said about instead actually having a contrast between Clark, who comes to Metropolis, versus Jimmy, who's that family is just baked into that city. And then, to establish this conflict with Lex. I mean, it gives Jimmy and Lex more to do and something new to do. And I think anytime you can kind of open up any kind of new dynamic, it's interesting. It's also great because then you get this business about Jimmy coming from this vast wealth to the point where he doesn't even need to draw salary from the Daily Planet. He wants the job. He wants to do what he does, but he actually doesn't need any money. And one of my favorite bits in this is that, not unlike those pre-crisis comics, he's always undergoing these various transformations that we see glimpses of, and he gets mixed up in all these crazy adventures that cause destruction throughout the city, and he's a huge liability. There's a whole insurance premium. That's what do they call it? The Olsen mitigation?
Yeah.
Right? And Perry's chewing him out about all of this and how much his stunts cost the paper and all this. But then they run the numbers, right? And his video essays are the only thing that generate money. And of course, Perry changes his tune. But that to me is I think the ideal of what Jimmy can and should be, where there's this aspect of, he's kind of a screw up.
Yeah.
But then there's the other side of this. And he actually brings a lot of value. I mean, literally to the planet financially, but value in terms of his loyalty and his courageousness and all of that. So I thought that was so good, man.
Yeah, there's a great gag. I don't know if gag's the right word, but a couple of times Lieber draws in whenever they're doing like, oh, this is all the shenanigans Jimmy's gotten up to. They'll throw in like a serious one of him dressed as a war correspondent. And they never dig into it, though at some point Superman does say like he's a war photographer. And I love the idea that at some point in between, the country club or college or whatever, he was like, nope, I'm going to Korak or Kandahar or whatever fictional war they had in place of the Gulf War. And he was on the front lines taking pictures of everything. And I really like that. That was something that Darwin Cook played with in New Frontier as well, where he and Lois were on the front lines of the Korean conflict. And I that always landed for me.
Thank you for bringing, as I was reading it, I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, make sure you mention New Frontier. And then I forgot. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. Like this idea of Jimmy just being this fearless, badass photographer who will get the shot no matter what. I mean, one of the things that is crystal clear throughout Who Killed Jimmy Olsen, right, is the vastness of his adventures.
Yeah.
Right. That there's so much that he gets up to. I mean, there's a point in the prologue where he wakes up in Gorilla City married to this transdimensional thief because they both got drunk off of gorilla champagne and got married and they don't remember it. And she takes off. And then there's this cat that spews blood everywhere. Right. But
that's supposed to be Dexter, right?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
I think so, but only because of, I think I came across that in a review. It didn't actually, because that's the Red Lantern? No,
yeah.
Red Lantern. Okay. Yeah. I checked out by that point. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay.
One day. Actually, actually, that's not true. I read all of that stuff. I just stopped liking it.
Yeah.
So anyway, but he has a line where it's in that prologue where he's like, the crazy thing is, I'm paraphrasing. He's like, the crazy thing is, I won't ever think about this again.
Yeah.
And I just remember saying to myself, like, that shows how crazy his life is.
Yeah.
That getting married drunkenly off of gorilla champagne and getting blood spewed everywhere is not even going to rate on the memorable things of his life.
Yeah.
So that was great. There's another moment where, and here's the beauty of this story, because the story jumps around, I feel like we can jump around.
Oh,
so
yeah,
I appreciate the freedom of that. But there's this great scene where he takes the place of Lex's helicopter pilot. And because he has to confront Lex, he believes Lex is responsible for his assassination attempt. And Lex says, like, do you even know how to fly that thing? Jimmy's like, of course I do. Right. And then he rattles off all the things he's done. Like, no one's broken into more headquarters, or that was something to that effect. Right. But I loved that capable side. Things aren't always going to go right for Jimmy, but it's like, oh, do you even know how to fly? Of course I know how to fly that. I love that.
Yeah. And I know you know how to fly it because I already have an escape plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I know that was great too, because it showed his capability, but also his shrewdness of love. And that was his escape plan.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh,
he's
yeah,
like, no, I know you can fly. I'm out of here. Because the authorities were waiting for him. He's like, no, I'm out. You can land it yourself.
Yeah.
Man, like that was. Oh, and then the other thing, going back to the Daily Planet side of things, we do get a flashback to when he was originally hired. And what I liked there too is, there were sort of behind the scenes photos that he was able to get of a politician and a criminal, something like that. But as he's explaining it, the reason why he was in that position is that at his country club that the family belongs to, right, he got to know all the bellhops and the port, like all the workers there who the other country club members probably never spend any time with. Yeah. But he talked to them. He got to know them. And that led him to this position where he was trying to help one of them who had gotten fired. And he gets this great shot. And Perry, I think it's Lois, right? When she's trying to convince Perry to hire him. And he's like, he talks to people. Yeah. Right. I liked, and it's not just that he talks to people, but that, he will spend time. Yeah. Right. Regardless of social class or anything like that. It showed a lot about his character.
Yeah. I think the reason this book doesn't feel like anything else is Fraction knows his characters. Everything that Matt Fraction has written, I feel like he spent a lot of time fleshing out the character for himself. So by the time it gets to the page, he just knows them. And it's perfectly on display here. This version of Jimmy both is everything I expected and has multitudes more than the character has ever had before. And you're listing all the great examples of it. So I think it's what Matt Fraction does so well.
So if you're wondering, well, why the hell is this thing called Who Killed Jimmy Olsen? So I would say that for all of the nonlinear jumping around and whatnot, the inciting incident of this story is that Jimmy is participating in this charity stunt. He's going to jump out of a spacecraft without a parachute and land on Earth. But before he does, he is going to be injected with metamorpho stem cells. Long story short, and obviously I'm including information that comes later, but Lex manipulated this situation and has one of the scientists aboard the ship mess with the concoction, inject Jimmy, and release Jimmy early. And so he transforms into this monstrous giant turtle man right out of the Silver Age. And rather landing where he was originally supposed to, crashes into and demolishes the monarch of Metropolis, this giant lion statue that the Luthor family had commissioned generations earlier. And this ties into the conflict between Julian. God damn it. I was going to say Julian Luthor because I was thinking of Smallville.
Yep, from Smallville.
Between Julian Olsen and Lex Luthor, where Lex wants the statue gone, despite the fact that his family had it created. He wants the statue gone because he wants to build this new railway, which always land, right? Always land involved. He wants access to the city's infrastructure because this project will give him access to, as they continually say, right? Water, power, gas, data.
Yeah, I know.
Right. So he wants the railway built. He needs his own family statue out of the way. Whereas Julian Olsen, despite the centuries-long bad blood between the two families, wants to preserve that statue. I mean, he claims it's because the city's changing too much and he wants to preserve the old version of Metropolis. Is that it? Or is there another angle to it?
I mean, if we're going into spoiler territories, he's also a terrible businessman.
Yes.
Like you learn later on that even though he presents himself as this like Donald Trump type character, I guess like Donald Trump, he's terrible at business. So he's like constantly squandering the fortune and everyone's like, oh, Julian, you know so much about business. It's like, well, no, the rest of you don't know anything about business. So I seem like I know what I'm doing. But you find out in the end that Julian actually has absolutely no idea and hasn't accomplished anything other than losing vast quantities of money. Lex obviously is very, very good at this.
Yeah.
So it's funny too to be like, Julian's like, we have to do this. And then finally at the end you realize like, oh, you have no idea what you're talking about either. The other one's got a plan. It might be evil, but he's got a plan.
Yeah. Yeah. We did a great deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I would say, the inciting incident, the giant turtle man, the destruction of the statue. And not long thereafter, Jimmy and Metamorpho, who are pals, are bringing this artificial decoy corpse of Jimmy Olsen that one of the Star Lab scientists had made back to Jimmy's place, and they put him in position, not purposefully. I think they were just transporting this thing and placing it. But as it turns out, someone was trying to kill Jimmy Olsen, and all of these shots pierce this artificial corpse, and Jimmy is presumed dead, and he goes on the run into hiding. He spends time in Gotham, which I got to tell you, man, and this comes up from time to time. There are a lot of things here and there that make me, I'll be like, oh, that's kind of funny. It's rare that stuff like legit makes me laugh out loud. And all of the stuff, this feud that Jimmy gets into with Batman is amazing. And there's this bit where Bruce and the audience find out that Alfred, this is why I'm saying this instantly became one of my favorites, because I'm like, this is so funny. Where we find out like Alfred goes around and pays people like the waiter to laugh at Bruce's jokes. And so the way this plays out, where Bruce finds out and he calls Alfred out on, he's like, how much over the years? And Alfred's like $85,000. And he's like, that'll come out of your pay. But the fact that it actually seems like it genuinely matters to Bruce, that he's funny, amazing.
Yeah, he puts the arrow on his head afterwards, and then he looks at the audience. He's like, I'm very funny. It's hilarious. I want a Matt Fraction Batman run so badly, even if it's just 6 issues.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was so fun. And then when he's in hiding, he assumes the guise of irresponsible blogger Timmy Olsen.
Yeah. Yeah. You got all snapped.
He plays all of these like kind of mean-spirited pranks.
Yeah, like I feel like a YouTube video type thing where it was like, oh, it was just a prank, bro. And it was like, no, 6 people are dead.
Yeah. No, but so yes, there is that edge to it. But then there is that one guy whose family was murdered by the Calendar Man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Who goes to Jimmy. And so it seems like at least some of what Jimmy is doing as Timmy. Yeah. Right, is trying to get Batman's attention so that he'll help this guy. I mean, that was my reading of it, at least, right? Like one of the running gags is, how many jokers at a certain place, like an ice cream shop, before Batman takes notice and shows up. And in a vacuum, it's like, oh, like he's just pranking Batman or he's being silly or whatnot. But kind of knowing, well, no, there's actually a little bit more to it where he's trying to help this guy. He's actually trying to get Batman's attention. I really did. I like that one a long way.
When Batman is in one of his dark detective monologues, and then he stops and he looks down and he goes, is that my tire? Because in an earlier one, Jimmy has stolen it off the Batmobile like he was Jason Todd. I laughed so hard. I literally had tears in my eyes. And then Batman turns to him and goes, you know what? You're on your own. Just leave.
I know. I guess the point where Batman's like, I can't protect you here.
I can't
you
do
gotta
this
go.
anymore, yeah.
You got to go. And, and Jimmy teams up with his sister and they visit other locations, including Opal City.
Oh, my favorite. Yeah. Okay. All right. So they set it up early on. They're talking about all the places Jimmy can go to hide out now that he's presumed dead. And they make this offhand joke. They say, all the famous cities are known for something. Opal is known for having tall bikes. And then they don't bring it up for a couple more issues. They finally go there. It's a double page spread. Everyone there is dressed like him riding penny farthings. I had to put the book down. I was laughing so hard. So for those of you who don't know, Opal City is the home of Starman, who during the 90s was like the world's biggest hipster superhero. It's like a place known for being old and a little too French, and there's a lot of secondhand stores. And it's just all the worst parts of Brooklyn. And the fact that he goes there, he sees them all. They're all dressed like him, like he's some social media icon. He turns to his sister, goes, absolutely not. And then they turn away, they leave Opal, and they never come back to it. It's my favorite bit in the entire 12 issues.
Yeah, that's, I mean, the setup in and of itself, but then, yeah, that abrupt, we have to go.
God.
Is amazing. There, I mean, while we're talking just kind of, bits here and there, one of the detectives, the main detective investigating all of this, Jim Corrigan, not that Jim Corrigan, as he continually says, which was great. Not the original Jim Corrigan, not the second Jim Corrigan from the Gotham Central series, but so like stuff like that, was really great and a lot of fun.
Yeah, my favorite thing in the entire book, other than the Opal, that I think about, and I'm not kidding here, at least on a daily basis, is when they're in Gotham, Jimmy calls Lois for help because in the early part of the series, he gets a message to Superman. He says, "You can't help me. I need to do this on my own. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, just trust me. I got this." So Superman is not in the book, regardless of the fact that his best friend is supposed to be dead. So it's a good pitch. Jimmy wants to figure it out, but he does call Miss Lane for help, and they have a great dynamic. She shows up at his apartment and he's laying out his crazy conspiracy. And there's just this single panel. It's one of the most beautiful things ever drawn. She stops him. She goes, "Jimmy, I don't believe in conspiracy theories." He goes, "What are you talking about?" And she goes, "Because I've been to the DMV. You can't get anyone to get together on anything, certainly not in the structure you are talking about. I have been to the DMV and thus I do not believe in conspiracy theories." Not a day goes by I don't think about that panel.
That really resonated. And I've never specifically put it in those exact terms, I felt similarly, I think, whenever it comes to conspiracy theories, because it's just like, people can't get it together for anything. So it's hard to imagine. But yeah, it is great as Jimmy's laying everything out, because at this point in the book, Jimmy's convinced Lex is behind everything. And because all of the people who Jimmy's come into contact with, especially in relation to his outer space stunt, have been dying or disappearing. The scientist who had injected him with the concoction early and released him, his brakes go out and he crashes and dies. Jimmy's attorney is attacked by the Porcadillo, part porcupine, part armadillo, D-list supervillain at best, who accosts him, and the guy has a heart attack and whatnot. It turns out, though, Porcadillo had hired Jimmy to do photos, and they're actually kind of buddies, and he ends up being an ally as we move forward. So yeah, Jimmy is laying out all of these pieces. There's also this business about Jimmy being arrested before the assassination attempt on him, right? Where he's arrested because Lex calls in. Essentially, Lex accuses Jimmy, and Jimmy's arrested, and then Lex recants, and Jimmy is released. I did love, though, you're right about there being very minimal Superman in this, but there's this, I guess 2 great bits when Jimmy's in lockup. One is how everyone is away from him, because that's Superman's pal, which is another great. I always like that. They played with this, I would say, a lot in the Jeff Johns Flash stuff too, about the rogues and the code that they have. And it's like, you don't take things too far, because it's like then the Justice League will be breathing down your neck. So I just kind of like this idea that everyone's like, whoa, like that's Superman's pal. But then there is a point where one guy starts to go after him, and Jimmy, I don't think he even sees it, but Heat Vision comes to the bars. Oh, that was great. So like Superman's still looking out for him. So I thought that was
I always love it when Superman has an excuse to take something personally, because he's always on the forefront of all these big battles and everything else. But this is different. This is his buddy. Like, this isn't like he'd be doing this whether or not he was wearing a cape.
Yes. Yeah. I like that a lot. And then of course Jimmy is released, and that's when the bullets hit the decoy corpse. I guess, what was my question for you? Why ultimately, I mean, like I said, we'll try to avoid spoiling the kind of the final central question of who killed Jimmy Olsen, but we can at least say this much, that yes, Lex was behind many of the events that unfolded here, including, of course, having Jimmy arrested. What was Lex's agenda for that piece specifically, like to have Jimmy in that particular place for that amount of time?
The jail.
Yeah.
Because he says early on, he says, I don't want my enemies killed. I want them around long enough to see me win. So he wanted Jimmy not to be killed. He was afraid that the assassin was going to succeed, and therefore he wouldn't see Lex Rail going through where the monarch of Metropolis was. The whole point is later on, when Jimmy finally figures out what's really going on, Lex makes a point of taking a picture of his face, which I thought was doubly ironic because that's what Jimmy does to everyone else.
Okay. Right on. Yeah, I mean, that whole bit about Lex saying, like, I don't kill my enemies. Like, I want to see their defeat and for them to realize they've been defeated. That was great. I really loved that take on that. And also kind of a good answer for it's like, yeah, why doesn't he just have everybody killed? It's like, he does have some people killed. But overall, no, that aspect was really great. And yeah, that tracks because there is, I forget which character, some character posits this at some point. I forget exactly who, but there is this notion at some point in the book of like Lex was actually protecting him in that moment, right? By keeping him in as safe a place as possible while the assassin was waiting. So that was, I wanted to ask you that. Oh, I guess, another question I have for you. We get to the end and this is also a spoiler, but an interesting one that I do want to talk about. So we and Jimmy learn that there is actually a familial relation between the Luthers and the Olsens. Because when that monarch statue is destroyed, there's this chest underneath with all of these artifacts and whatnot. And we learn this. And Miss Tessmacher shares this information with Jimmy. And this is at a point now where the Olsen family fortune is depleted. Yeah. And Miss Tessmacher comes to Jimmy to reveal that, he and Lex are related, which means that Jimmy has access to the Luther trust and also a say in how Luther funds are spent. And then Jimmy goes and confronts Lex. But Miss Tessmacher has this whole bit about how Lex needs to be challenged. Yeah. Right? That seems to be the motivation for cluing Jimmy in about all of this. I guess my question for you, does Lex know that she's done this, or is she doing this on her own? My read is that she does this on her own, like she's kind of looking out for Lex in her own way. Or do you think Lex sent her to have that conversation with Jimmy?
I don't think he sent her, but I think he knew that she was going to do it. Because early on when they're looking through the box, he had her do all this research, and she's, again, he has red hair. He knew this. He's the smartest man who's ever lived. He knew this, but he makes a point of making Miss Tessmacher find out on her own so that she shares it. Cause again, Lex's whole thing is like, he's the guy so far above everyone else you don't even know he's involved. He's Lex Luthor. So I read it as, well, he pointed her along that path so that she would act thinking that it was in his best interest. But I just assume Lex knows everything. The only thing that Lex will not admit to himself is that Clark Kent is Superman. Aside from that, Lex knows everything.
Yeah, fair. And I do love that kind of that final showdown between Jimmy and Lex, and how Lex just can't help himself in admitting to the wrongdoing that he has perpetrated. And of course, Jimmy is recording the whole thing. Yeah. He's like, I'm gonna have to quote you on that.
But I also think it's like, she's right though, because he wants that. He's like, well, it's Lex has unlimited money, right? Like if he needs more money, he builds something, he patents it, he moves on with his life. So the idea that at the end of the day, he's just funding the Daily Planet because all of his enemies hang out there and he likes to watch them trip over themselves. Like, I think that's hilarious. I actually thought the funniest part was not the Daily Planet, but the fact that he said, you have to pay for my
sister's plays.
Sisters, but they're like specifically avant-garde play. They must be the most intolerable things in the world. And the fact that he is going to have to pay for them is probably the sticking point. It's probably the part that he didn't want to do. A couple of million for the Daily Planet, fine. But those off-Broadway nonsense, I can't do.
Yeah, no, that was very funny. And by the end of the story, Jimmy ends up as publisher of the paper. This was very interesting. So like I said, I read the trade. And at the start of issue 12, you have Perry breaking the news to everyone that the planet is going to fold, that it's this financial loser and the board has decided to just close up shop. Yeah. And then of course, Jimmy steps in with the Luther Trust and becomes publisher. But, he just essentially talks about falling subscribers and the typical reasons that you would expect a newspaper in this day and age to close. Yeah. But then I forget what specific reason I had for this, but I was on the DC app and I pulled up the single issue of Who Killed Jimmy Olsen number 12. Mm-hmm. And there's different dialogue in the original issue.
Oh, really?
where when Perry's breaking the news, there's a direct reference to the Leviathan arc from the Bendis run, where he talks about how their former publisher was up to no good.
Okay.
I've not read that story. I read the Bendis Superman stuff, but I stayed away from the Action Comic side. So I didn't have all the backstory on this.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But I just found it fascinating because, and I'm actually glad they made this change, because had I been reading the trade and then there's a reference to Leviathan, I think it wouldn't have ruined the experience, but it definitely would have taken me out of it for a second. Whereas the way they played it, like, it's vastly more timeless what Perry says to them.
Yes. However, having read it in the original issues, it did make sense at the time because the publisher that he mentions is in the first issue.
Right.
I forget her name. She
Leone or something.
Miss Leone. Yeah. Thank you. And she was a new character that I believe Bendis introduced. So I think that was to explain why she wasn't there at the end. But to your point, years later, no one remembers any of those characters or Leviathan. So I didn't know that he had changed the dialogue, but having read it both ways, I prefer the trade.
Random, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. One of the other bits that I loved was after Jimmy is presumed dead, the members of the Jimmy Olsen fan club create replacement Jimmy Olsens dubbed the Reign of the Subpar Men. And it's great. So we have androids. We have a young kid who's dressing up as Jimmy Olsen. We have like multiple kids who stuff themselves in, I don't call it meat suit. I don't know what you call it. But I thought that was a lot of fun.
I loved that bit so much. Yeah, it was a kid you're supposed to think is a cyborg Jimmy Olsen. And then, it's literally two kids in a suit, but the suit is made to be a beautiful model that wears glasses similar to the Eradicator. So there's these two women who were flirting with him and he's very silent. And then off panel, like, again, you have to look in the background sometimes to have the gags pay off. Like Lieber really, he goes whole hog on this.
I love Lieber's stuff. And it's funny, when we just did our Worlds at War aftermath, he drew Superman 174. Oh, okay. Where Clark is reunited with Martha and he's rebuilding the farm. But I love his stuff. And especially reading this, what was so cool, there's a cartoonish element, yet I don't know, it still feels very grounded and the characters feel very expressive and emotive.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really tremendous. Like I like that a lot. So the art was great.
I love Steve. I do. I love him so much. When he was doing Superior Foes of Spider-Man with Nick Spencer, every issue is better than the last. I mean, his design work, his action, the whole thing is just beautiful. And then when he was announced as the co-creator of this, I was like, this couldn't possibly be better. And he nails it. All the disguises Jimmy's in, the one issue where he dresses as a woman, the whole thing. It's just, he sells every bit, every joke, every skit. It's just like, yes. Like he's a good humor artist, if nothing else.
It's so good. I mean, if you have the app, all of the issues are there on the app. Yep. And then of course there's also the Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen's boss, Perry White story that Fraction and Lieber did. I got to tell you though, when they solicited this, I'm like, yes, Perry White, one shot, great. I pulled it up on the app. I was a little dismayed that it's only 7-page. Yeah. It's only a 7-page story that's original. The rest is all reprint material. Yeah. They reprint one of the Daily Planet vignettes from the Who Killed Jimmy Olsen. And then the rest of them are just Superman reprints from the past, which is fine. I did think there was going to be a little bit more, but I really did like that Perry White short story that we got where, it's essentially just, I know this is kind of beyond the realm of Jimmy Olsen, but this creative team telling another story in close proximity to this one, but it's just kind of this idea that it's become such a cliche, such old hat for Perry, this newspaper man, about how consistently Superman saves Metropolis. It's just like the same story spun, as many different ways as comics there are. And then kind of the flip in this issue, or the story that Perry is telling, is that this is an instance where the people of Metropolis save him because Lex has tricked the city into building these alien hunting machines. Yeah. Right. But they are designed or programmed not to hurt humans. So humans essentially form a shield around Superman. And so it's Metropolis saves Superman, the flip on what we typically see. So it was cool. I love to see Perry get some play, get the spotlight. And it was a cool hook. And it's one of those things where I don't know that I've ever thought about that per se, but I mean, if you're the editor of the Daily Planet, it's like, all right, after a while, I mean, it must get a little tired. We're like, all right, another headline. Yeah. Area man saves area.
Yeah, I mean, they're supposed to be the upstanding newspaper. You know, it's not like with Jonah across the street where it's like, I'm just going to make something up and run with it. You know, that'll get distribution out. So
yeah. Well, we've been going for 2 hours. I think we've done Jimmy Olsen justice. I like to think so. Yeah. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to talk about? Anything you want to say with respect to this miniseries or Jimmy generally?
I could talk about this book for hours. I love it. I loved it when it was coming out. I love it now. I loved rereading it. If you are still on the fence about whether or not to go out and read this book, there is a cameo at the end by the last super thing that I expected to see. It's the alien race from Superman versus Muhammad Ali. It's the only real deep cut. For the most part, the series skips out on using the wider DCU. It really just focuses on the characters it introduces, but it randomly brings them back. Jimmy's literally like, no, I was there. They helped Superman and Muhammad Ali settle their differences, and he uses them to help defeat a different alien race. And it was just great. So if you were on the fence for any reason, get it just for that, because it's a great bit at the end.
That was great. Yeah, I think, like I said, I think we did justice to James Bartholomew Jimberly Olsen.
Yeah, Jimberly. Oh, man. Yeah, there's so many gags in this book about the way they play with his name, and just, you know, Fraction's present as the omniscient narrator, and he just throws things in. He has little conversations with you. It's such a dream to reread.
Well, I thank you so much for rereading and coming here to the studio and having this discussion and sharing your insight about this work and your affinity for Jimmy generally. So I thank you very much. I thank you, audience. I always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you keep tuning in. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the show and receive exclusive content, including the spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, advanced listens, and more by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Subscribe, rate, and review today via your platform of choice, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Links are in the show notes. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now covering the color era of the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today.